In this section, we'll go through some of the basics of Linux command line. If you're already a Linux maestro, then feel free to skip this section or simply go through the labs and try to complete the challenges and make sure you're comfortable with all of them. While designing this course, we used Stack Overflow's insights along with the data from surveys we conducted from our student base, which you might have seen in our other courses, to identify the most commonly used and most demanding technologies that we will cover in this course. That way we can make this course relevant to most of you. So you'll see me referring to these often, and I hope learning the most loved and wanted technologies will motivate you. As per Stack Overflow's insights, the most common and the most loved platform used for development work happens to be Linux. If you're from a Windows background, I'd highly recommend learning some Linux basics, as most DevOps tools have a requirement for Linux. The reason I say that is because many of the new DevOps tools are developed and used in Linux environments first before they are made available on Windows. For example, containerization tools like Docker was only available on Linux-based systems for many years before being supported on Windows platforms. Similarly, automation tools like Ansible requires it to be installed in a Linux environment. Even though Ansible can manage Windows systems as target machines, a Linux system is required to be the Ansible controller. In case of container orchestration tools like Kubernetes cluster, the master nodes can only be Linux systems. As the documentation says, there are no plans to have a Windows-only Kubernetes cluster as of this recording. So when you go through our Kubernetes series of courses, and setting up a Kubernetes cluster is all done in Linux. The same is true for certification exams. The Kubernetes and Red Hat Ansible certification exams are all to be done on Linux systems. So if you plan to learn these technologies and get yourself certified, then it's important to have knowledge of basic Linux operating system. And if you've always thought Linux is not for you, you might want to go through our courses and think again. As part of this course, we cover basics of Linux OS, such as how to work with the command line interface, how to work with text editors like VI Editor. We discuss package management and services, etc. There are different flavors of Linux, such as Ubuntu, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, CentOS, etc. We conducted a survey of our students, and a good percentage of them requested their preferred OS to be CentOS, followed by Ubuntu and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. CentOS is a free community edition of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, so learning CentOS also helps you cover the basics of RHEL. Learning CentOS will also help you prepare for Linux certifications like Linux Essentials or Linux Foundation's Certified Systems Administrator certification. Now, since you also cover basics of Red Hat Enterprise Linux by going through this, it also helps you prepare for any Red Hat exams. So you kind of cover two versions of operating systems, CentOS and Red Hat Enterprise Linux, in one shot. And that's why we decided that CentOS is going to be the OS of our choice for this course. Note that this course covers a variety of topics from Linux to applications to databases and web servers, etc. And so this section is only meant to be a crash course in Linux. If you'd like to learn more about Linux than what is covered in this course, I recommend going through the full-fledged Linux Basics course available at CodeCloud. It's a completely new concept, a new way of learning. It's in a story or a comic format and has a lot of lab exercises that you can practice with. And I'm sure you'll love it. So check it out after you're done with this course. So let us begin our Linux crash course. In this section, you're going to work with Linux systems in our lab. This is so you get very familiar with the Linux CLI and some basic commands before you actually deploy a Linux system by yourself. The next section is about deploying a Linux system on your Linux laptop using tools like VirtualBox. When you do that, the CLI and commands you learn in this section will be handy. So I recommend not deploying your own Linux system for now. Instead, just rely on our labs and get some good hands-on practice. And then in the next section, deploy your own VMs. So we will start assuming a Linux system has already been provisioned. Let's start with shell. Linux systems have both CLI and GUI interfaces. When you work with Linux, especially in IT, you work with the CLI, and you must get really comfortable with it, because most servers that you work with in your work environment won't really have a graphical user interface. So we will just focus on the command line. The text-based command line interface that helps you run commands to interact with the operating system is called the Linux shell. If you have ever worked on a Linux system before, you might have noticed that sometimes the CLI interface behaves differently, as in sometimes you press the backspace button to delete a command and it doesn't work, or when you press the tab button to autocomplete, it doesn't autocomplete. And that's because there are different kinds of shells, such as the Bourne shell, the C shell, Z shell, Born Again shell, which is known as Bash, and each of these shells behave differently. The older shell, which is the Bourne shell, or simply known as shell, had limitations in the way we interact with it. The newer Bash shell supports many advanced features such as arithmetic operations, conditionals, arrays, etc. You can see which shell you are on by printing the environment variable named shell using the echo $shell command. The echo command helps you print on the screen, and the dollar symbol helps you specify an environment variable. Let's now get introduced to some basic Linux commands. We will first look at the commands, and you will then work on labs where you will use these commands. Echo, as we just discussed, is the command used to print a line of text. The word you enter after the echo command will be printed on your screen, as simple as that. The echo command is usually used when you want to print out an environment variable, as we just saw. We will discuss about environment variables later. The echo command is also used in scripts where you want to print out information onto screen. The ls command is used to list all the contents of a directory. Here we see that we have two files, file.txt and file2.conf, and a directory named my_dir1. The cd command stands for change directory, and it is used to navigate to new directories in the system. For example, to get into the my_dir1 directory, run the command cd followed by the directory name. The pwd command, or the present working directory command, is used to print the directory you are currently in. The mkdir, or the make directory command, is used to create a new directory. In this example, we have created a new directory called new_directory. To run multiple commands, one after the other, separate them by a semicolon. In this case, it first changes into the new directory, then makes a directory by the name www, and then prints the current working directory. Now, even though it's a single execution, remember there are three separate commands and executed one after the other. At times, you might want to create a directory tree. For example, we want to create a directory /tmp/asia/india/Bangalore. One way to do that is to run the make directory command 3 times, specifying one directory each time. For example, first we create the first directory, and then we create the India directory inside Asia, and then we create the Bangalore directory inside India. A better way to do that would be to run a single command using the -p option like this. This way, it creates the entire directory tree in one shot and does not complain if a particular directory is not available. To remove a directory and all of its contents, run the rm-r command and specify the directory name. To copy one directory to another location, use the cp command, but with the -r option. This copies the directory and all of its contents from one location to another. Let's see some commands to work with files. To create a new file, run the touch command and provide the file name. This creates a new file, but with no contents. To add some contents to the file, use the cat command and the redirection symbol, which looks like a forward arrow, followed by the file name. Once this command is issued, the prompt will wait for your user input. You would be able to add lines of text. Hit the return key to type into a new line of text and press the Ctrl-D combination to exit out of this prompt and save the data to the file. To view the contents of a file, run the cat command followed by the file name, this time without the redirection symbol. These are some basic commands to work with files in the CLI. For editing contents of a file, you may need a text editor like VI or Vim. We also take a look at the basics of VI editor later in this course. Now, while working with DevOps tools, you'll often come across situations where you will have to modify configuration files on Linux, and these editors will come handy then. But to get through this lecture and the following labs, you don't really need a text editor. So let's continue. To copy a file, use the cp command and specify the source file path and name and the target path and name. To move a file, which is similar to cutting and pasting a file to a different location, use the mv command. Specify the old name and the new path and the file name. If the file is moved to the same path but with a different name, then it's essentially like renaming the file. So you're cutting the file, which has one name, and then pasting it in the same directory with another name. So that kind of works like a rename, and that is how you rename a file in Linux. There's no separate command for that. Run the rm command to remove or delete a file. So that's about it for this section. Head over to the labs and practice working with these basic Linux commands.